White groom tells black caterer to stay out of photos. Then the bride breaks down in tears. The August sun hung high above the city, casting its golden hue upon the sleepy hills of Napa Valley, where the vineyards whispered secrets of age-old romances, and the air felt rich with anticipation. Tucked away between rows of ripened grapes and swaying cypress trees stood the Rosamond estate, a breathtaking venue with ivory pillars, wrought iron balconies, and a courtyard that glowed like a scene from an old Italian film. This was the chosen place for what many guests believed would be a picture-perfect wedding. Classic, elegant, and unforgettable. As caterers rushed about the polished stone terrace, final touches were being made. Lavender centerpieces perfectly aligned on each table, champagne flutes glinting like tiny suns, and white silk napkins folded with the precision of origami. Among those orchestrating this culinary ballet was Darius Cole, a tall, sharply dressed man with sleeves rolled up, clipboard in hand, and the kind of calm that only came from years of experience. He wasn't just a caterer. He was the best in the Bay Area, and today, he was determined to ensure that the Harris Prescott wedding ran smoother than a Swiss timepiece. Darius took a step back from one of the dessert tables and tilted his head slightly, observing the delicate arrangement of lemon tarts and berry pavlovas. His staff moved fluidly behind him, respectful of his space but ready for any last-minute instructions. Then, from the grand entrance of the estate, laughter and camera shutters erupted as the wedding party emerged in full splendor. The bride, Elise Prescott, looked ethereal, her gown a flowing cloud of silk and lace, her auburn hair swept into a loose bun with tiny pearls glistening like morning dew. Her eyes searched the crowd, alighting on familiar faces with the kind of warmth that made even the vendors feel seen. And beside her, in a stark black tuxedo that looked like it had been tailored in Milan, stood her fiancé, Andrew Harris, tall, blonde, and unmistakably charismatic, though some noted a stiffness in his posture that hadn't always been there. Darius, came a voice, soft but urgent, from his earpiece. It was Maya, one of his assistants. "Cake's 5 minutes late. Want me to call the bakery again?" "No," he replied calmly, checking his watch. "They're cutting it close, but we've got a buffer. Just make sure the ice cream station stays shaded. Last thing we want is melted vanilla soup." "Got it, boss." Just as he turned toward the wine station, he noticed the photographer, a young woman with thick-rimmed glasses and a lens as long as his forearm, snapping shots of the tables. She was crouched down, angling for that perfect artistic frame, the kind that would eventually end up in a glossy wedding magazine or social media post with hundreds of hearts and comments. Darius gave a polite nod as she glanced up, and she smiled back before returning to her work. He didn't hear the groom approach until he was just a few feet away. "Hey," Andrew said, his voice flat, almost too casual for a day like this. "You're the head caterer, right?" Darius turned, extending a firm hand. "That's right, Darius Cole. We've spoken a few times over the last few weeks. Congratulations to you both. Everything's coming together beautifully." Andrew hesitated a second before shaking his hand, his grip oddly limp. "Yeah, it's looking good. Thanks for that." There was a pause, not an uncomfortable one, but charged somehow, as if something unsaid hung in the space between them. "I had a quick thing to ask," Andrew added, eyes flicking briefly toward the photographer, who was now taking wide-angle shots of the whole courtyard. "This is kind of important. We've got a very specific aesthetic going for our wedding album. Elise has been dreaming about this since we met. We want it to be really cohesive, magazine quality, you know?" Darius nodded, eyebrows raising slightly. "Absolutely. Our team knows how to stay behind the scenes." "No, it's not about that," Andrew said, rubbing the back of his neck. Look, this is gonna sound weird, but could you maybe just make sure you and your team aren't, like, in the photos? Especially the posed ones. We're trying to keep a very clean, classic look. It's not personal, okay? Darius blinked once, then twice. The words had been spoken with a veneer of politeness, but there was something beneath them, an edge so thin it was almost imperceptible. Almost, he responded slowly. Of course, we always do our best to stay out of posed shots unless requested. But we'll be in the background here and there naturally. It's part of the day after all. Andrew smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Right, just, you know, if you could be mindful. Some people can be a bit distracting in those shots, especially with the lighting and colors. Understood, Darius said, voice even, though his jaw tensed slightly. He wasn't new to microaggressions. He'd built his entire business navigating them with grace. But today of all days, in the middle of what was meant to be a celebration of love, it hit differently. Andrew offered a final nod and walked back toward the wedding party, where Elise was laughing with her bridesmaids. She glanced over, catching her fiancé's eye, and waved Darius a grateful smile, oblivious to the exchange that had just taken place. Back in the catering tent, Maya noticed the shift in her boss's demeanor immediately. What happened? Nothing I haven't heard before, he said, exhaling through his nose. Just keep everyone moving. We've got a job to do. But even as the music started and guests began filing into the courtyard with glasses of rose and toothy grins, a faint unease had crept beneath the surface of what was meant to be a flawless day. Because sometimes, even at the most beautiful weddings, things are not always what they seem, and sometimes a single moment, a single sentence, can set off a chain of events that no one sees coming. This was just the beginning. The first dance was set to begin in just under an hour, and the air was thick with the heady scent of gardenias, fresh pastries, and expensive perfume. Laughter echoed across the courtyard like bells. Polite, controlled, but beginning to fray at the edges as the champagne loosened everyone's shoulders and brightened their smiles. On the surface, the Harris Prescott wedding looked like everything a high-end bridal magazine would dream of showcasing. Opulence without pretense, charm without effort. But Darius Cole had been in the business long enough to recognize when something in the atmosphere had turned, imperceptibly like a shift in barometric pressure before a storm. He stood near the wine table, giving quiet direction to a young server who had just spilled a small trickle of Riesling on her apron. She looked mortified, but Darius simply handed her a clean cloth, murmured a word of reassurance, and waved her back into position. His eyes, however, never stopped scanning the event. That was his gift, precision not just with food but with people. And he had noticed something. Andrew Harris was watching him. Not constantly, but enough. The first few times, Darius had brushed it off. A groom had a right to monitor the flow of the event he was paying for. But this wasn't that. Andrew's eyes didn't roam like a project manager's or a perfectionist's. They landed on Darius, lingered too long, then flicked away, always with the same brittle, tight-lipped expression, like he was swallowing something bitter. Darius didn't flinch. He never did. But he remembered. He remembered that awkward pause, that faint emphasis on aesthetic, that tone of being polite while implying something entirely else, a tone Darius knew all too well from his early days in the business, back when he was one of the only black caterers working luxury weddings north of San Francisco. Back when people smiled with their mouths and shut doors with their eyes. Still, professionalism was a blade he had honed to perfection. And so he moved through the wedding with quiet dignity, his presence felt but never disruptive. When Elise herself came by to compliment the hors d'oeuvres, a warm blush rising in her cheeks as she raved about the fig and goat cheese tartlets, Darius accepted her praise with genuine humility, even as his mind still replayed her fiancé's earlier request like a stone skipping across a still lake. But Elise was different. That much was clear. She made a point of asking Maya if she needed anything, if the catering team had enough shade, enough water, if the heat was too much. She stopped to compliment one of the sous chefs on the delicate sugar flowers piped onto the cupcakes. She even offered to help move a stack of wine glasses when she noticed a cart tipping precariously near the dance floor. At one point, as Darius was adjusting the arrangement of the late-night snack table, a charming display of mini sliders and truffle fries, Elise walked by and gave him a grateful smile that held none of her fiancé's tension. "You've been amazing today," she said sincerely, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear. "I mean it. I know weddings can be chaos and everyone's on edge, but you've just been solid, like grounding." Darius chuckled, surprised by the candor. "Thank you, Ms. Prescott." She tilted her head, laughing softly. "You can call me Elise, and thank you again. I know I'm not the easiest bride." "You've been gracious," he said. "That's rarer than you'd think." There was a pause. Elise's eyes grew a little more focused, more thoughtful. "Did Andrew say something earlier? When he came to talk to you?" Darius hesitated just for a second. Nothing worth repeating. But Elise's brow furrowed. She stared at him for a moment longer, as if trying to read a page he hadn't meant to show her. Then a guest called her name, and she offered an apologetic smile, her heels clicking away like the punctuation at the end of an unfinished sentence. It was an hour later, when the dancing had begun and twilight fell gently over the valley, that the moment came. The photographer, whom Darius now knew was named Becca, had been moving through the golden haze with elegance and efficiency, snapping candid shots of laughter, clinking glasses, and warm embraces. The guests had loosened their ties and kicked off heels. The music had shifted from classical strings to a soft indie folk playlist. And Becca, doing her job, turned her lens briefly toward the catering team, who had gathered near the side tent during a lull in food service. Maya, young and radiant, was laughing at something one of the dishwashers said. Darius stood beside her, arms crossed, the setting sun catching the silver flecks in his beard. It was a beautiful shot, the kind of behind-the-scenes humanity that made wedding albums feel real. Becca raised her camera. Click. Then Andrew was there. Fast. Too fast. "Hey, hey," he said, voice low but firm as he stepped between Becca and her subject. "Can we not do that?" Becca, startled, lowered the camera. "Sorry? Do what?" "The staff photos. We're not using those. Not for the final set." She blinked. "Oh, well, I'm capturing the whole atmosphere. Sometimes the candid vendor shots are really popular, especially if the couple connects with the team." Elise said. "I know what Elise said." Andrew cut in, voice clipped. "But I'm telling you now, we don't want those. It ruins the mood. I've already talked to the guy." He turned briefly toward Darius. Not hostile, not aggressive, but with that same forced civility that no longer felt unnoticeable. Becca, clearly uncomfortable, looked from Andrew to Darius and back. "Okay. I mean, sure, if that's what you want." But Darius didn't speak. He didn't need to. The silence said enough. Still, as Becca turned away, Elise was already approaching from the edge of the dance floor. She had seen something, not everything, but enough. Enough to catch the tension in Becca's posture, the thin line of Andrew's jaw, the quiet way Darius had stepped back like he'd been dismissed. "What just happened?" she asked, looking between the three of them. Andrew smoothed his expression instantly. "Nothing, babe. Just making sure we're keeping the look consistent." Elise's gaze narrowed slightly. "The look?" Andrew gave a practiced chuckle. "Yeah, you know, just keeping the brand, the vibe tight. And then Becca did something unexpected. She hesitated for a moment, then spoke, gently but clearly. He told me not to take pictures of the caterers, said it would ruin the aesthetic. There was a pause, a long, aching pause. Elise looked at Darius. He didn't flinch, didn't offer explanation, didn't need to. He simply inclined his head and said, "We'll stay clear of the cameras, ma'am. We're here to serve, not be seen." Something cracked in Elise's expression, not anger, not yet, but something, a confusion, a deep internal pull. She turned to Andrew. "Did you really say that?" Andrew gave an awkward laugh, raising his hands like he'd been caught sneaking an extra slice of cake. "It wasn't meant like that, Ellie. I didn't want distractions in the album. That's all. It's about keeping things clean." Darius turned then, quietly, and walked away. He didn't need to stay for the rest of the conversation, because he already knew this was no longer about a photo. It never had been. It was about what people thought belonged in the frame, and what or who didn't. As the lavender twilight of Napa Valley deepened into navy blue, and the vineyard hills were gradually swallowed by the calm of evening, the wedding's atmosphere shifted. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable, like a chill riding on the edge of a breeze. But for those with a keen sense for the emotional undercurrents of a room, it was undeniable. The laughter had become more measured. Conversations, once easy and flowing, now faltered at moments. The music still played, upbeat, nostalgic, carefully curated, but the tone had already changed. Elise Prescott was no longer smiling. Not the effortless, wide smile that had carried her through the ceremony, the cocktail hour, and the early parts of the reception. Not the one that had graced her face when she danced with her father beneath the hanging lanterns. Now her lips were pressed together, a soft, unreadable expression behind her eyes as she wandered away from the main dance floor and toward a quieter corner of the courtyard. Becca, the photographer, had packed away her wide-angle lens and was now taking subtle candids with a smaller, unobtrusive camera, keeping her distance. She, too, had felt the sting of the interaction with Andrew. Not because of personal insult. She had been in the industry long enough to have developed a thick enough skin for client quirks and last-minute demands, but because she'd seen something more corrosive than just an overly controlling groom. She had seen a man draw an invisible line in the sand, and worse, watched everyone pretend it wasn't there. Almost everyone. In the far side tent, beneath string lights and a canopy of quiet shadows, Darius Cole leaned over a ledger and double-checked the dessert inventory. It was a pointless task. Everything had been accounted for hours ago, but it gave his hands something to do. His team, sensing his mood without needing to be told, moved carefully, respectfully. They had seen the exchange even if they hadn't heard the words. They had felt the cold current that had passed between the head caterer and the groom like static before a storm. Maya stepped beside him, wiping her hands with a towel. "You good?" Darius didn't answer right away. He finished a note on the paper, laid down his pen, and took a long breath. Then, calmly, he said, "You ever do everything right and still feel like you're intruding?" Maya tilted her head. "All the time." He gave a half laugh, more breath than sound. "Man tells you you're not part of the picture, and suddenly you start believing it. Start stepping quieter, standing smaller, like you're a guest in a room you helped build." Maya's voice was soft, but steady. "You built more than the food today, Dee. You built the atmosphere, the joy, the memory." "Not to him," Darius murmured. And just then, someone cleared their throat behind them. Elise stood a few feet away, still in her wedding gown, her heels silent on the soft grass, her eyes rimmed with something that looked suspiciously close to tears. Darius straightened, gently adjusting his jacket, as though pulling on armor. "Mrs. Prescott," he said. She shook her head. "Elise, please." Maya offered a polite nod and excused herself, slipping away into the deeper shadows, leaving them alone. "I came to say something," Elise began, folding her arms tightly across her waist, her voice quiet but firm. "You don't need to," Darius said with the grace of a man who had been apologized to more times than he could count, usually by people who didn't truly understand what they were apologizing for. But Elise didn't flinch. "No, I think I do." She glanced over her shoulder to make sure no one was nearby, then turned back. "I heard what Andrew said. All of it. And I didn't say anything at the time because I was trying to hold the day together. You know, like, not let one moment ruin everything. But the truth is, it already had. I just didn't want to admit it." Darius watched her silently, his expression unreadable. She took a deep breath. "You've been nothing but professional, warm, generous. I've watched you all day, how you speak to your team, how you treat everyone. That's not just skill, it's leadership. And it's grace. And the fact that that anyone would ask you to hide from a photo because you ruin the aesthetic is not just offensive, it's disgusting. And I'm ashamed." A moment passed. Then another. "You didn't say it," Darius replied quietly. "I married someone who did," Elise said. "And that matters." He looked at her then, really looked at her. The trembling lip, the furrowed brow, the way her hands kept twisting the delicate fabric of her gown. There was something deeply human in her expression. A woman caught between the illusion of a perfect day and the hard truth of what it had cost her to maintain it. "I've spent years pretending not to hear those kinds of comments," Darius said at last, his voice like gravel smoothed by time. "Pretending they didn't cut as deep as they did. Because if I reacted every time, I'd never get any work done." Elise stepped forward. "You shouldn't have to pretend." "I know," he said. Another silence. Then she asked the question. "Would it be okay if you were in a photo with me?" Darius blinked. It wasn't what he had expected. Not today, not from her. Not after everything. "You want me in your wedding album?" he asked, a note of disbelief in his voice. She smiled sadly. "No, I want you in my memory of today. The real one, not the edited one. Not the one Andrew keeps trying to manufacture. The one that actually happened, where you helped hold it all together. Where you brought grace into a space where it was sorely lacking." For a long moment Darius said nothing. Then slowly he nodded. "All right." She stepped back, raised a hand to Becca, who had been hovering, unsure whether she should interrupt, and motioned her over. The shot they took was quiet, unplanned, unposed. Elise in her gown, barefoot now, standing beside Darius under the canopy lights, the dishes behind them, the cooling night settling on their shoulders. No forced smiles, just honesty. When it was done, Elise turned and said, "Thank you for everything." Darius didn't say "you're welcome." He didn't need to. He just gave her a short, respectful bow of the head. As she walked away, back toward the glowing estate and the groom waiting inside, Darius felt the first drops of the coming change. Not rain, but something heavier. Because she would soon have to face the consequences of what she'd seen. And the man she had just married was not going to take her act of truth lightly. But for the first time that day, Darius no longer felt like he was standing outside the frame. He was exactly where he belonged. Inside the Rosamond Estates ballroom, the chandeliers shimmered like frozen fireworks, each crystal catching light and splintering it across the marbled floor. Music pulsed gently through the air, the rhythm no longer wild with joy but measured, restrained, like a heartbeat unsure of itself. Guests continued to dance and drink and laugh, but beneath the glitz, something had undeniably shifted. The energy had dipped, slightly yet palpably, like a well-rehearsed performance losing its rhythm. Elise Prescott stood at the edge of it all, drink untouched in hand, watching the celebration unfold like a movie she no longer felt part of. Her photo with Darius had been brief, just a few quiet minutes outside, and yet it had left an aftertaste she couldn't shake. Not bitter, not sweet either. It was something more complicated, something like awakening. Andrew, now deep in conversation with two of his college friends near the bar, laughed loudly at something one of them had said, tossing his head back, his jaw sharp in the low light. His tuxedo remained perfectly pressed, his smile perfectly timed. From the outside, he looked every bit the groom of the year, handsome, confident, charming. But Elise could see the undercurrents now, and once you see them, you can't unsee them. A moment later, Andrew caught her gaze and made his way toward her, weaving through guests like a politician on his victory lap. "Hey, babe," he said, leaning in to kiss her on the cheek. She turned slightly, not away but not quite toward him either. "You've been gone a while," he said, light but expectant. "I needed air," she replied, eyes on the dance floor. "Too much wedding?" he teased. "Too much something," she muttered, taking a slow sip from her glass, not flinching at the bitterness. Andrew paused just briefly. "You all right?" "No," she said, not loudly, but with enough weight that he couldn't pretend he didn't hear it. "I'm not." He tilted his head, the grin slipping from his face. "Okay, what's going on?" Elise turned toward him then, fully, her eyes sharp, no longer misty but flinty with purpose. "I want to talk about what you said to Darius. And to Becca." Andrew exhaled through his nose, irritated. "Seriously? Are we really doing this now? It's our wedding, Ellie." "Exactly," she said. "It's our wedding, which is why I care how you treated the people who helped make it happen." His smile was gone now, his jaw visibly tight. "Look, if this is about that photo thing, I already told you it wasn't personal. I just didn't want random staff in the background. It messes with the aesthetic. That's not a crime." "Aesthetic," she repeated, her voice low but steady. That word again, like people are decorations, like certain faces don't belong in your version of beauty. Andrew laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Oh, come on. Don't twist my words, Elise. You're acting like I said something awful." "You did say something awful," she said, her voice cracking slightly, with anger, not weakness. "And you didn't even blink." Around them, the party continued. No one noticed, not yet, but their words were becoming sharper, more exposed. Andrew leaned in, voice low. "Look, I get it. You're emotional. Weddings are overwhelming. But let's not blow this out of proportion. I made a choice about the tone of our wedding album. That's all." "No," Elise replied louder now. "You made a choice about who you think deserves to be remembered. And that is not a small thing." A few nearby guests turned their heads. Andrew stepped back, his voice still low but growing colder. "Are you seriously doing this in front of everyone? After everything we spent? After everything I planned?" Elise let out a soft, stunned laugh. "You think this is about money? I think you're embarrassing both of us," he snapped. She didn't move. She didn't yell. But her next words cut deeper than any raised voice could. "I saw you," she said. "I saw the way you looked at him, like he was something you were trying to scrub out of the picture, like he didn't belong. And if you could do that, if you could be that kind of person on our wedding day, then I don't know who I married." Andrew's expression froze. For a moment, He looked like a man trying to recognize his own reflection and finding a stranger staring back. Then he said something she would never forget. "You're being dramatic." And just like that, something inside Elise broke. The silence that followed wasn't the quiet kind. It rang in her ears like the sudden absence of noise after a crash. Her hands trembled slightly as she set down her glass. Her breath came shorter now, her vision sharp with clarity. She turned without a word and walked away, moving past stunned guests, past the elegant decor and the music and the lights, until she was outside again. But this time, she didn't stop under the lanterns or at the edge of the dance floor. She kept walking, toward the tent where Darius and his team were packing up. She didn't care what anyone thought anymore. Not about optics, not about perfection, not about who would be in the frame. Becca saw her first, then Maya, then Darius. "Elise," Darius said cautiously, rising from where he had been securing trays for transport. She stopped in front of him, blinking rapidly. Her mascara had started to smudge. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know I said it before, but I need to say it again. I let it happen. I stood there while someone I love acted like you were disposable." "You don't have to." "I do," she said, her voice breaking, "because I married him today, and I don't know what that means anymore." There was a heavy pause. Not just between them, the whole tent was quiet. Darius looked around at his staff, at Maya, who gave a small, supportive nod, then back at Elise. "Sometimes," he said carefully, "the clearest moments don't come during the ceremony. They come after, when the music fades and you start to hear your own voice again." Elise's eyes welled. Then she asked, "Can I stay here for a while?" Darius gestured toward a nearby folding chair. "You can stay as long as you need." And so, under a canopy of quiet lights, with a few plates clinking softly in the background and the distant thump of a party still going on without her, the bride sat among the people her husband had tried to erase, not just from photos but from the story. And for the first time all day, she let herself cry. Not for a ruined wedding, but for a truth she could no longer unsee. The last guests trickled out beneath a sky salted with stars, their laughter fading like the final notes of a song long overstayed. Inside the once lively estate, the chandeliers still glowed, casting light upon tables now empty of conversation but heavy with half-finished wine glasses, crumpled napkins, and the remnants of what was supposed to be a perfect night. Andrew Harris stood near the edge of the dance floor, one hand shoved into his tuxedo pocket, the other running agitatedly through his neatly styled blonde hair. His jaw twitched, his posture unspooled. Gone was the polished charm, the glib smile, the curated calm. What remained was confusion, no irritation, that the evening hadn't gone the way he planned. Across the room, the wedding planner whispered hurried apologies to vendors and guests, trying to clean up more than just spilled champagne. Whispers floated like feathers from table to table, delicate but unavoidable. "Did you hear what happened?" The groom said what? To the caterer. She left the reception, went out back crying. It was no longer a secret. The story had made its way into the bloodstream of the night, spreading with every quiet gasp, every sidelong glance. Meanwhile, outside the tent, Elise sat still, shoulders draped in a gray shawl one of the servers had handed her. Her wedding gown, once pristine, was now slightly wrinkled, the hem dusted with dry grass and dirt. Her mascara had long since faded into faint shadows beneath her eyes, but she didn't care. She was surrounded by Darius, Maya, and a few others, the ones who weren't supposed to be part of the picture. And yet here they were, the only ones whose company didn't feel artificial. Elise held a cup of warm tea someone had quietly brought her. She hadn't asked for it, but they'd seen her. They'd really seen her, in a way her new husband hadn't. Finally, she spoke. "I don't know how I missed it," she said, not to anyone in particular. Or maybe I didn't miss it. Maybe I ignored it because it was easier to believe he wasn't like that. Darius sat across from her, hands folded in his lap. People can hide parts of themselves for a long time, especially when they know how to play the part everyone wants to see. But he said it like it was nothing, Elise whispered. Like excluding someone based on how they look, based on who they are, was just a design decision. Like you were a piece of furniture that didn't match the couch. She looked up, eyes glossy again. "And I let it happen. I didn't say anything at first. I watched it happen." Darius held her gaze, steady and calm. "The important thing is you saw it. And you didn't keep pretending once you did." A long pause passed between them. Then, slowly, Elise pulled off her wedding band. It made a soft metallic sound as she placed it on the wooden table. "I think I need to go." Maya, who'd been standing quietly to the side, stepped forward. "Do you need someone to walk you back inside?" "No," Elise said, rising to her feet, stronger now. "I need to walk away." And that's exactly what she did. She walked back into the ballroom, her face composed, her movements calm but purposeful. Conversations dropped into silence as she entered. Guests turned. Andrew spotted her instantly, relief flashing across his face, until he saw the look in her eyes. "Ellie," he started. She held up a hand. "No." He took a step toward her. "Can we talk?" "We're done talking," she said clearly. "You crossed a line. Not just tonight. Long before this. I just didn't want to see it. But I do now." He looked around the room, feeling the weight of eyes. "Can we please not do this here?" She looked at him straight in the eye. "You already did." And with that, Elise turned again, walked through the grand doors of Rosamond Estate, and didn't look back. Outside, Darius and his team watched from a distance as the bride disappeared into the night, the shawl fluttering behind her like a departing flag. There were no cheers, no fireworks, no picture-perfect goodbye. But there was truth, and sometimes that's the only thing that matters in the end.